Greetings, respected viewers. I am George from Ireland, and this video is about how Donald Trump is hugely exacerbating the corona pandemic in his own country. President Trump said that the cure should not be worse than the disease. So let's remind ourselves what the disease is going to do. Kill people. And what's the supposed cure going to do that's so bad? Mean that some people have a bit less money. Now, which is worse, death or losing some money? It's a no-brainer. I'm stunned I should actually have to ask that. Obviously, Trump doesn't think that death is going to happen to him or anyone he cares about. That's very few people. Whereas losing money he cares about an awful lot. He's never concealed it. There's the speech said, money, money, money. I was always money, greedy, give me money, 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 like that. So it was always mammon worship with him. One would have thought that people find that a trifle off-putting. Isn't that a bit troubling? Someone who holds the highest office in the land being completely motivated by filthy lucre. There's nothing else he's been consistent about. At least when he said that he craved money, that had the ring of truth. I don't doubt that that was a veracious statement from him at last. And this is a crisis which would tax even an alpha mind. You know, Emmanuel Macron, very bright chap, went to l'École nationale d'administration, which is France's top university, and it's elite, it's tiny, it's much smaller than Harvard or Oxford, much more selective. And his country has struggled with that. Other clever leaders, you know, it's not just a matter of brains, but if you're a real dum-dum, is that going to make it worse? Yeah, it is, if your policies are going to be worse. France, Spain and Italy have taken fairly severe measures, only just managed to contain it. If we're lucky, it's peaked and it's going to start tumbling. It may not, it might be a plateau, it could even go on rising. But with Trump, there has been lie after lie. And these are not just naughty, these are truly pernicious. They're more reprehensible than claiming that the coronavirus didn't even exist, saying it was a hoax made up by the Democrats. Words fail me that he could tell such a truly evil lie, which is going to condemn thousands of his countrymen to death, jeopardizing people by saying, yeah, you don't need to be in the least bit worried about it. He said he's not concerned about it. He was briefed about this as least as early as the 20th of January, and saying he's not concerned at the moment, saying he doesn't take any responsibility as it's been shooting up and following the same trajectory as many other countries. There's modeling on this. You could look at the data, how it goes along very, very low, it starts to rise, and then the rise is really dramatic on the chart like that. He's made wrong prediction after wrong prediction that there were only 15 people, and within 15 days that'd be close to zero, and 15 days later it was like close to 1,000 infections, and on and on and on. I'm just trying to see, because obviously it's changing by the minute. The United States has got over 70,000 cases now, and a bit over 1,000 dead. So a week ago, the United States was about number 10 in the world for coronavirus cases. It's about to overtake Italy. You know, the United States may well overtake China. At least Trump will have made America great again in one thing, you know, in the most coronavirus cases, and the most utterly moronic response to it, considering it's the wealthiest country in the world in total, not per capita, not by a long shot. And so much could have been done. You know, him and his Republican Party, and to some extent the Democrats, they want the United States to be able to blow up the world several times over, but not to save their own people. The Democrats are at least decent, do want to save their own people. So you can want to be able to wipe out Homo sapiens, but not to save them. This is pernicious madness. So one needs evidential reasoning in order to come up with a decent policy on anything. I would have thought that goes without saying, but isn't it obvious? And then he makes all these statements without any evidentiary basis that it's going to go away. Now, he and his party are very much anti-enlightenment. It makes me contrast them with, say, people in the 18th century who were a bit forward-looking. These far-seeing people, the encyclopedias said, if we only gather all the knowledge there is in the world, then we could make decisions based on knowledge, and there'll be rational decisions to solve problems. That's the sort of thing the physiocrats believed, and obviously Trump and his band need to move forward into the 18th century. Think of the founding fathers. what visionaries they were by contrast. What a sad degeneration for a country which was once at the cutting edge of thought in almost every field. And of course, there still are American intellectuals, there still are universities that are academic powerhouses there, that trailblazers in so many fields. And how is it that they seem to have got the most wickedly moronic person in the world in charge? Okay, he's not the stupidest person in the world, but honestly, that's how people want leading them. I mean, at least 40% of Americans think he's the bee's knees. So you need to come up with a hypothesis, right? So that it's going to do this or that. You think it's going to fall. What is your evidence that it's going to go down of its own accord without you taking any action? Countries which have taken severe measures have just about managed to control it. In China, it's gone down. Even in Wuhan, where the first host was, they've managed to ease off some of the restrictions on people after 6 weeks, and they've tracked people. People had to take their daily temperatures. So been quite a lot of invasive measures. Perhaps people wouldn't accept these abridgments of their liberty in the United States. Therein lies the rub. There's a lot that's admirable about that we shouldn't throw our civil liberties out the window, and despot would never let a good crisis go to waste. And these temporary measures have a nasty habit of becoming permanent. Governments learn to value the new powers they've acquired over people, to jealously guard them, and to be very reluctant to let go. That's why people often don't want to cede authority to the government, lest the government never give it back. But the People's Republic of China at least has had a logical policy. You might think it was an overreaction, but it was targeted, and it's actually been fairly effective. Are they lying their statistics? Probably. Have they at least made some progress? Well, almost certainly. Don't think they would ease off for good reason. They don't want it any more than anybody else does, partly because it kills their people. I know the Chinese government doesn't really give a damn about their people, but they do care about economic growth. And they don't want fewer customers, fewer taxpayers, fewer workers. Anyway, so there's this hypothesis that he had that it would go away, with no logical reason to believe that. Turning down tests that were offered by the World Health Organization, telling porky pies an outright lie that everyone who wanted to get a test could get a test, that there was no reason to be worried. It's sick-making. So he and his party are very anti-science. So he seems to overreached himself in saying it's going to go away several times. It was on St. Patrick's Day, that's when really the solids hit the fan. He was started to be a bit worried about it. It wasn't serious until then. All of a sudden it was. It reached a level he couldn't ignore. 15 cases. Remember that. I think it was early February, the 15 cases. It was going to go close to zero. How close to zero is it now? Try 70,000. I can't calculate. How many times has it multiplied up to 70,000? I'm just flabbergasted constantly, this man's Herculean effort to deceive people, and yet 40% of Americans are eating out of his hand. How can they think it's fantastic? How does he have a shred of trust? He never fails to astonish me, or indeed the willful idiots who delude themselves and follow him. Anyway, he was always talking about a miracle. Yeah, that was it, because it was completely unscientific. There was no rational basis for believing it was going to go away. Where has this ever happened with a virus like that just out of nowhere? Now, it might start to dip, but you could see the trajectory in other countries. It was only going to rise. But he's a bit like Peter Pan. Did you ever have that read to you when you were a child, when Tinkerbell dies? Okay, if every child in the world says, I believe in fairies, if you close your eyes, if you believe hard enough, it will happen. That was it. It was a faith-based initiative with him. He wasn't even praying, so far as I know, didn't claim to. So wishful thinking. He's outdone himself for irrationality. Anyway, it was a personal best for malice as well, to say that the Democrats made it up and now urging people to go to church. You know, hundreds of people in church, thousands, densely packed together. Wow. You know, Trump, you take the biscuit. He is something else. Now, he is notorious for his poor competence in logical reasoning. I don't think he's very mathematical. Neither am I. He's clearly got no business now. So look at all his business failures. You need to be able to count in politics, they say, as LBJ said, and presumably in business. But obviously he can't, which is why he constantly went bust. He's ungrammatical. You look at his imbecilic utterances. There never was someone worse equipped to handle a crisis of such unexampled gravity. This is on something on the scale of the Spanish influenza. But the Spanish influenza was partly because people were so debilitated and malnourished after the First World War. The Trump maladministration seems to be condemning tens of thousands of Americans to death. So he didn't take firm and precipitate action. He wanted to save the economy. That would have saved the economy if you'd contained it, stopped it spreading very much. It's worked quite well in South Korea, in Singapore. They have shown us the way. Their policies ought to be emulated. And incidentally, don't draw the inference from my words that I'm saying the United Kingdom's response has been fantastic. It hasn't. Or in the Republic of Ireland, which has been better, actually. Republic of Ireland, we've only had 300 cases. Bad enough, I know. Only 9 deaths. But proportionally, that is actually very low. Because if you can keep the infections low, it's not hard to figure out you're going to keep the death toll low, partly because fewer people have got it to die from, but also you have enough doctors, nurses, ventilators to treat those who need life-saving intervention. So they say a stitch in time saves 9. If you take timely and firm action, you can solve the problem. If you don't, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and harder to solve, possibly impossible to solve. Even if you can resolve the issue, it's going to be costlier and more time-consuming. And they're nurses going in without proper hazmat kit. I've seen the footage wearing plastic bags. I don't know how many cases that is. And he's just told lie after lie about it, offering people false hope, saying the insurance companies wouldn't charge them. It's just nauseating. And then there's this malaise in Republican politics whereby his lies go unchallenged. They'll false accuse others. They won't face up to the seriousness of the situation. He would have done a lot more for the economy if he'd taken prompt action, prevented the contagion spreading. There would have had to be some sort of semi-shutdown for a couple of weeks, and if you're lucky, back to normal. But he hasn't done it, and the economic damage is going to be all the greater for his failure to act when he should have done so. So we're often told the American people have the right to know the truth, so tell it to them straight. And he was praised by his side for his supposed straight talking, when there's nobody more bent in politics I know of. He is very crooked. It's a canker which ought to be cut out of the body politic. Constantly running away from reality. Such a coward, he will never face up to the truth. The truth is sometimes ugly, so be man enough to acknowledge what the truth is, to hold your hand up and say, hey, I got it wrong, I made a mistake, or I did something morally wrong, what it is, to own up to what you've done. And he never does that. He never admits that kind of thing. He is that morally bankrupt. So it's going to require many weeks of sacrifice in various countries. Here in the UK, Boris Johnson said, we can beat it in 12 weeks. Doesn't say we will beat it in 12 weeks, but if we're lucky, if we all pull together, we can do that. Actually, in the United Kingdom, it's not being policed strictly enough. Seen a florist's open, other things like a stationery shop open. These don't need to be open. Should be down to minimal public services. A lot of construction could stop, then fewer people on buses, fewer people on trains, and only essential services operating. In the United States, there's been some sort of voluntary shutdown in some states. It's been compulsory in some states. I'm not sure how much authority state legislatures and governors have. And again, I don't know enough about United States law to be able to say how broad presidential authority is for ordering things to happen or things to be prohibited during a state of emergency. Remember, see how much more seriously he took the so-called caravan. I wonder one of those will appear just on cue to help his re-election campaign. The caravan who didn't kill anyone, weren't threatening to kill anyone. This had already killed 1,000 Americans, and this is probably just the very beginning. You look at how the death rate is going to shoot up. So this is a disease which kills, which is rather worse than losing money. I mean, I had to make a choice recently. I could make £240 and risk death. Well, is my life worth more than £240? Perhaps surprisingly, I decided that it was. Maybe 241. But I said no to that work because I want to stay alive. I could always earn £240 later, but I can't earn a penny once I'm dead. So the cure is to make people slightly less rich. If he really cared about the economy, he would not pursue these destructive economic policies, these tax cuts for his billionaire cronies. If he cared about ordinary Americans, give them this wealth rather than these false charities that he steals from. It's nauseating. It's just endless what he does. Difficult to know where to begin to castigate this man sufficiently. So the corona is picking up speed, alarmingly. You see how it's mushroomed in other places, the number of people getting it multiplying in the United States, increasing by 1.5 times in one day. It can swamp the healthcare system. So it's going to kill people who die from coronavirus. It's going to kill from other people who can't get healthcare because the doctors and nurses are all busy with coronavirus. That's happened in other countries. So, yeah, there's the 26th of February when Trump said 15 people have got coronavirus in the United States, and in 15 days it'll be close to 0. So that would have been when? Would have been the 23 days, okay, it would have been the 12th of March. I don't know what it was by the 12th of March, but it was in the hundreds, had it. So Trump knew it would be a massive killer. He was told that. Intelligence briefings months ago. World experts counseling them. He disregarded that. He closed his mind to something that was unpalatable. This is magical thinking. He has been grossly neglectful. He has not been serving his people. He has the attention span of a mayfly. And so this is a crisis made in the Oval Office. The White House could have taken charge of the situation, could have put out warnings, clear, consistent advice, endlessly repeated. That would have saved some lives. Even the hand washing thing. I know we should wash our hands anyway, but more frequently, and 20 seconds, and get it into a lather, because apparently that kills the virus. And people are more likely to follow these guidelines if they know the rationale behind them. I only discovered this one yesterday. That's why it's got to be 20 seconds. It's the lather is critical in saving your life. Wanting churches to be open at Easter. Well, what's Easter got to do? That's not scientific. It's a movable feast anyway. And saying it's a beautiful time, not so beautiful if you're dead. Well, there'll probably be a lot of coffins in the church at Easter. Would that be beautiful? Yeah, well, it's true. Easter is about death and resurrection. He will at least bring about the former. Now, as for resurrection, I think most Americans are neither Jesus nor Lazarus. So they'd be better off not getting coronavirus. Going to church? Well, there's no need for you to go to church if you want to worship. Our Lord and Savior himself said, when 2 or 3 are present in my name, that I'm there. So this is like a war, Trump himself said. So no vacillating. FDR didn't waver over Pearl Harbor, nor George W. Bush over 9/11. So he needs an unequivocal response. And Boris Johnson in the United Kingdom, he's also been bad on this one. So, anyway, in the UK, the government is going to pay 75% of the wages of those who can't work at this time. The United States, it's something similar could help. There's been some sort of economic rescue package. He's decided that the stock market matters more, which matters particularly to the super wealthy. He said, we're near the end of our historic battle with an invisible enemy. Ha, ha, ha. Another utterly wrong prediction. If I didn't know better, I think, is he trying to be as stupid as possible? Is he trying to get it as wrong as he can? A bit like a Manchurian candidate. I mean, if he was one, Putin could scarcely have done better. And incidentally, this would be a time to really hit Russia with sanctions. Oil prices down to $30 a barrel. The Russian budget balance is at $40 a barrel. NATO countries can say we're not buying any energy from Russia because we can get it very cheaply. There's a glut on the market. Help Saudi Arabia, as in against Iran. I know the Saudi government is worse than the Russian government, but nevertheless, that would be US policy. Really screw over the Russian economy until they withdraw from Crimea, Donbass, Transnistria, other illegally occupied areas, Abkhazia, South Ossetia. At least make Putin pay a price for his illegal wars of aggression and his state terrorism around the globe. Anyway, so this stimulus package, doesn't that prove that government intervention can help the economy? We so often hear from Republicans that it can't. It will make it worse. I remember Bob Dole saying, a government which takes over the economy for the good of the people ends up taking control of the people for the good of the economy. And he was cheered to the rafters in the 1996 Republican convention. But yet this party supports subsidies for this and that. Obviously massive intervention in the economy in terms of the military manufacturing industry, the military industrial complex. They want to get the government off the backs of the people, but have constantly intervened with corporate welfare, funneling money from the poorest to the wealthiest. And now, single-payer healthcare, wouldn't that help in terms of people wouldn't have to worry about paying for tests, wouldn't have to pay a penny? That's paid for through taxation and their treatment, and much more likely to survive. So the United States people not getting tests, can't afford tests, going around, spreading it to other people, and going around for too long, such that they can't be saved, even they could afford treatment. So this is why health is a public health issue. Your health impacts on me. It affects me. I can infect others. So yeah, it is a public concern. This is a contagious disease like so many others. And as for the economy, I buy a lot more when I'm alive than when I'm dead. Keep your customers alive. I think that would be the first rule of any business. So doctors and nurses in the United States, they're qualified in one state or another. They're not recognized in other states generally. I can't remember which state has said we're gonna recognize the credential of a nurse from another state within 24 hours. Amazing it takes that long. I mean, is the United States one country or not? All right, I know you have different laws from state to state, but the human species are the same in every state. How can the regulations be that different? To overemphasize localism is surely moronic. So, and as for keeping the government out of healthcare, this is the most regulated activity of all the laws passed around it. And indeed, people are very litigious. Lawyers are involved. If you really wanted government out of it, you would have a much more libertarian approach to it. Anyway, so Trump obviously doesn't care a fig for his people. He has other priorities. He's privileging money over lives. Yeah, so that's really going to be good for the economy. People dying who can't buy anything. And they won't just be the elderly. It would also be young people who are more economically productive. Elderly voters. So this is how utterly asinine he is, encouraging his elderly religious voters to go to church and die. The disease is mostly in California and New York, of which more later. So he's ethically suboptimal, to say the very least. That might be the understatement of the millennium. Completely indifference to the suffering of others. There's a total dearth of empathy on his behalf, as has long been observed by many pundits. So Trump clearly lacks intellectual ability and the temperament to cope with this. And if he really thought the economy was more important, he could have said from the beginning, no, shut down. But you see how he's wavered on this one. He's not led consistently. Maybe somebody had a word in his ear. So he doesn't face up to the truth. I remember, hearing Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor of Texas, say, "Do not sacrifice the country." Sacrifice? Like kill? Well, you'll be sacrificing people by sending them to an unnecessary death, by encouraging them to go to church, go to work, all the rest of it. Some of them could have worked at home, then go out and get a deadly disease and pass it on to others. How good is it for the economy if people are dying? I know people die anyway, but much more. Because now the US has only had 1,000 deaths. Italy's had 7,000 deaths. Now Italy has about a sixth of the population of the United States. So 7,000 multiplied by 6, about 42,000. 42,000 deaths is, I think, the least the US can expect, bearing in mind that Italy has taken very firm measures. There have been stringent controls on movements, not allowed out of their house apart from to the pharmacy or to the supermarket to buy food. Can't move from one district to another, not even allowed to attend funerals, and even that has only just managed to control it. I just can't believe what that lieutenant governor of Texas said. You were willing to take as a risk. Yeah, but it's not just about you. You'll pass it on to others, including your own family. And it's not just elderly people who'll die. There was a healthy 21-year-old in the United Kingdom, and she died very recently. So I know those who've got pulmonary problems are more susceptible to it, but you can still fall a victim to this, even if you're not in any of those at-risk categories, high-risk categories, I should say. Larry Kudlow also going on television to encourage people to just disregard it, carry on as normal. It was incidentally, it was on Tucker Carlson's hate program that Dan Patrick said this. Tucker Carlson, that liar, that xenophobe. Wonderful. Lovely. Wouldn't it be great to have churches packed at Easter? Yeah, with coffins? Because the way you're going, that's going to happen. And thinking that in 3 weeks we can beat it, no way on earth can it be beaten. As I said, even with draconian measures in China, it took 6 weeks to get it under control. People are still being infected. There's still deaths, but not very many. And one thing is, obviously, some people who are in a debilitated state of health, they catch it and the fever die just a few days later. Those who are in rude health, they might hold out for several weeks. So your infections could be going down, the deaths could be going up, because those who are robust could resist it for some time. lots of things could be done about, discouraging handshakes. Boris Johnson belatedly said he wasn't going to shake hands. Anyway, so Trump has set so much store by the stock market. He clearly cares about that more than his people. I know people die anyway, but this is excess mortality. Should we care about the spike in deaths or not? And if we shouldn't, why was all this kerfuffle over 9/11? So what? 3,000 people. It's only 3,000 people. We are 300 million. Carry on. Don't change the law. Don't fight any other countries. Nobody said that, did they? Anyway, he would love to have things open by Easter. Okay, who wouldn't? I would love to have things open by Easter. I don't like this social isolation. It's not what you want. It's always about him, what I want. Foreign leaders like me. It doesn't matter whether they like you or they do like you, they don't like you. It's not just about you. It's about the United States. What is good for your country, rather than what's nice. Who's always so superficial, always judged by appearances. Oh, these people came in here looking very nice, so they wore expensive clothes, right? Is completely superficial. What's the substance? Which is why he hires all the best people, so many of whom get sent to prison. He has to fire, they resign, they say he's a malevolent moron, and on and on and on. Anyway, this battle has hardly begun in the United States. He's been highly irresponsible, as so often denying reality, spinning a completely bogus narrative right back to Obama's not being American and twaddle like that. Part of this growing assault on truth and objectivity on the part of the Republican Party and its most pernicious mouthpiece, Fox News, and they put out lies there which are very virulent, the birther nonsense which I already mentioned. So this is abetted by many evangelical Christians, I'm afraid to say. The sort of casuists who will argue that up is down, that the Bible is a guide to morality when it mandates slavery, things like that. That Trump is a good Christian when he's brags about his adultery, about committing sexual assaults and all the rest of us, when he spews hatred and on and on and on. Remember, lying lips are a disgrace to the Lord? I don't remember which part of the Old Testament says that in. So he doesn't have the cognitive faculties to cope. I'm not suggesting I do. His mind is patently malfunctioning. You don't need to be a doctor to figure out that one. Look at him in the 90s. He was almost dignified. He was self-possessed. They say to be in command of others, you must first of all be in self-command. And clearly he's not. He's losing control. And that's why there are all these tirades, these expletive-laden rants he used to make on television. His speech is peppered with non sequiturs. The way he can scarcely pronounce things, can barely string a sentence together. And in the 90s, he was placid. He could be on display mode. And then, but what's he like now? Completely lost the plot. This cantankerous old curmudgeon. So workers are dying, not good for business. Customers are dying. People are afraid to go and buy stuff. And if there had been early and strong action, it would have been very much limited. Would have been some deaths. It wouldn't have been 1,000. Could have been rather fewer. Many countries, Israel as an example, have dealt with this very smartly, and it's not a serious problem there. A handful of deaths. So if you do things early, like anything else in intervention, anything else in medicine, early intervention usually cauterizes the problem. So health spending. People are going to have to spend an awful lot more on that, so they have less money for consumer spending. There's going to be very little tourism in the United States when their coronavirus cases are skyrocketing. Who'd visit? Not me. And some people will leave the country to get away from it, even Americans. Some people refusing to go to work or to buy things, as you can obviously see. So Trump is being an ostrich, sticking his head in the sand. Well, if I can't see it, it can't see me. It's going to go away. Really smart. He said it was going to go down, not up. I mean, how wrong could he have been? I could just harp on about this all day. I'm staggered, just lost for words again and again and again. The evidence is superabundant, a mountain of proof positive of his outright lies and malevolent idiocy, and yet 40% of Americans would put their faith in him again. It really undermines some of the key assumptions which underpin democracy, that people are rational, people can judge in their own best interest, that they care about honesty at all, that they wouldn't vote for their own destruction, but clearly a lot of them would. Like Devin Nunes, and it's not just Trump. Look at other Republicans. Devin Nunes going on television to urge people to go to restaurants. It's easy to get a table. I wonder why it's easy to get a table. So to spread it around, to get it, to pass on to the beleaguered waitresses and waiters who can't afford not to work, the minimum wage plus tips. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to afford their health insurance or anything. Their health insurance, which won't even cover a lot of things. The governor of Oklahoma going to a restaurant with his children, taking photos, posting on Instagram, as if to urge people to go and do the same. Wow. It just blows me away. Anyway, so New York and California, the two worst affected states, all right, they're the two with highest population. But New York City, very internationally engaged, and California, quite cosmopolitan too. A lot of Asian Americans in San Francisco in particular, from the Bay Area, flying to the Far East, and that's why that was sort of a infection vector. No ethnicity is to blame. We're not saying there's any malevolence on the part of people who unwittingly contracted this disease, but these are major ports of entry. And so middle America, not going to affect the states furthest from the coast as much, but it will gradually spread as people are traveling. In the big cities, people are more liberal, i.e. more rational. I hate to say it. Might say, oh, well, conservatives can be smart too. They can. I'm a conservative in a way. But the hard data rather favors the idea that liberals are a bit more rational. I know ultra liberals not. Less faith-based. And going to take the necessary action. There's another issue of population density. If you live in your little house in the prairie, there's no other house for a mile around, you're fairly safe. If you live cheek by jowl with loads of people, it's much more likely you can pick it up or transmit it to others. But anyway, Trump doesn't care about Democrats, and these are states he's never going to win. So is there method to his madness? But I think it'll hit his base as well, especially if they start going to church, as he is pleading with them to do. They say 10% of New York City cops are infected. I'm not sure that's true. And they can't get tests. So it is metastasizing. And it may well shoot up like in Italy. I would love to be proven wrong. So don't trust the government. We often hear this in the United States. Well, I think under Trump, I definitely wouldn't trust the government. But federal government is always bad. So don't accept the subsidies then, poorer states. Don't accept farm subsidies. Don't accept these military bases of these contracts building things from the US military, federal funding for highways. Don't accept that. I never hear of red states not accepting a penny. Anyway, federal government can only do so much, state government can do so much. I don't know what the dividing line is. There were very strict measures in China and Western Europe, and only just got it under control, stabilizing, I hope, going down a bit. Too early to cry victory. And the thing is, if you relax the restrictions too soon, it'll go up again. So if there are not serious restrictions, then it'll spread like wildfire. So we might be a pinnacle in Western Europe. The UK, I'm awfully sorry to say, I think it's going to continue going up. So China, a totalitarian state, struggled to bring this under control. The United States is admirably libertarian, not totally in some areas, but that doesn't solve a problem. What are you going to do about the crisis? These are extraordinary times, desperate times call for desperate measures, and I don't think there's a wherewithal to take the firm and necessary action. If it kills 1,000, you might say we can live with that. Okay, our liberty is worth that, 1,000 lives for 1,000 people. How about 10,000? Would you be willing to abridge your civil liberties if there are going to be 10,000 people died if you don't? Maybe not. If it's going to be 100,000, would you do it then? If it's going to be 1 million? If it's going to be 10 million? At some point, you have to say public health is going to have to trump individual rights, at least temporarily. So fact-based decision-making is needed. And that's it. Trump is just a stranger to reason. Alternative facts, aka lies. So study the data projections from so many other countries. There have been many of these other epidemics. Well, this one's a pandemic now. And even then you can only make an educated guess, and he'll just make an uneducated lie. And he had these top experts advising him. The sleep of reason brings forth monsters. That's that title of that drawing by the Spanish artist Francisco Goya in the 18th century, and that's where we are. Reason is sleeping in many people in the United States, and that's why this monster is in charge. and unleashing a monstrous situation which he could have done so much to reduce. Couldn't obviated it altogether. So there's a silver lining through the dark cloud shining, as Sir Ivor Novello canticled, because at least air quality's improved. We can be happy without shopping, avoid the commute and so on. So I saw what Professor William Hasseltine said, a former lecturer at Harvard Medical School, saying in 2004 there was a warning. Remember severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS? And the US government was told it's very likely that more of these things are going to come again. Develop drugs now to treat something similar, and coronavirus is one of them. We're not certain that this eventuality would transpire. We prefer that it didn't, but we better be ready. And there's not in a state of preparedness. The US government disregarded these persistent warnings and didn't put the money into it. Drug companies wouldn't do it because it wasn't going to be profitable. You see, it's not all about profit and loss. Saving lives isn't always profitable. You would ideally do it because it's the righteous thing to do. Okay, where's morality in all this healthcare stuff? Nowhere in the Republican agenda. So this pandemic war plan. Why would we pay for a medicine that we might never need? You're right, you might never need. But if you don't have it, you're in trouble. I have a fire alarm. I don't want a fire. I don't think one's likely. But I'm ready just in case. So the US government paid for drugs against bioweapons, but not against this one. Oh, the federal government is involved in healthcare. Is that a bad thing? Should the United States not have these drugs to save its people against bioweapons? Of course it should. And this one is not caused by human malice, this coronavirus, but nevertheless it's a natural existing thing. And would it be worth having it? Yeah. We could maybe even get people to pay for it later, but at least make it. Anyway, so there we are. I've got friends in the United States. I'm sorry to say the whole situation is going to get an awful lot worse before it gets better. It might sink Donald Trump come November, but amazingly, a lot of his supporters will stick with him, even if he kills them. Toodaloo.